The popular history of the Battle of Midway has a problem that its most famous moment creates. The 5 minutes between 10:22 and approximately 10:27 on the morning of June 4th, 1942, during which American dive bombers reduced 3 Japanese fleet carriers to burning hulks and permanently shifted the balance of naval power in the Pacific, are so dramatic in their compressed consequence that the history tends to begin there, with the dive, the silence in the cockpit, the target growing in the bomb site, the 60 seconds that changed the war, and to treat everything that preceded those 5 minutes as prologue. The prologue is where the actual story lives. The 5 minutes were the operational expression of decisions made in the months, weeks, and hours before McCluskey's dive bombers arrived over an undefended carrier force at 10:22. Understanding what produced those 5 minutes, what built the tactical situation that made them possible, is understanding not a story about heroism under fire, though there was heroism, but a story about intelligence, deception, sacrifice, and the specific sequence of choices that placed a force without fighter cover on the receiving end of one of the most concentrated and consequential attacks in the history of naval warfare. The foundation of the American ambush at Midway was laid not in the Pacific, but in a basement office at Pearl Harbor, in the Station Hypo code-breaking facility commanded by Commander Joseph Rochefort. The Japanese naval code, JN-25, had been partially broken by Allied cryptanalysts, and the intelligence that Rochefort's team was extracting from intercepted Japanese communications in the spring of 1942 included the indication that a major Japanese operation was being planned against a target identified in the communications as AF. The identification of AF as Midway was the product of an intelligence technique that, in its simplicity, demonstrates the practical genius of the people executing it. Rochefort's team had Midway's base radio the Pearl Harbor Command in plain language, reporting that their freshwater distillation plant had broken down. Days later, intercepted Japanese communications reported that AF was experiencing freshwater problems. AF was Midway. The deception that confirmed it cost nothing and identified the target of the largest Japanese naval operation since Pearl Harbor. Admiral Chester Nimitz, receiving Rochefort's intelligence assessment that the Japanese were planning a major attack on Midway in late May or early June, made a decision that the raw force comparison between his available carriers and the Japanese fleet did not logically support. He positioned his 3 carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and the hastily repaired Yorktown, northeast of Midway, in an ambush position from which they could attack the Japanese carrier force before that force was aware of their presence. The Japanese operational plan, designed by Yamamoto, with the assumption that the American carriers were at Pearl Harbor or farther south, included no provision for American carrier forces in the Midway area. The plan's fundamental premise, that the Kido Butai, Japan's carrier striking force, would approach Midway unopposed from the northwest, destroy the island's air defenses, and then deal with any American carrier response from the direction of Pearl Harbor after the island had been secured, was built on an assumption of American ignorance that Rochefort's code-breaking had already destroyed. The Japanese carrier force under Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo arrived northwest of Midway in the early hours of June 4, 1942, carrying the assumption that no American carriers were within range. The assumption was wrong by approximately 200 miles. The American carriers were positioned exactly where Nimitz had placed them based on Rochefort's intelligence, and they were positioned to attack the Japanese carrier force in the window between the Japanese first strike on Midway and the Japanese preparation of a second strike against whatever American naval forces appeared. That window, the interval in which Nagumo's carriers would be engaged in rearming and refueling aircraft after the Midway strike and before a second strike could be launched, was the tactical opportunity that the intelligence had identified and the ambush position had been designed to exploit. Nagumo's decisions during the morning of June 4th were the decisions of a commander receiving information that his operational plan had not anticipated and making real-time adjustments whose cumulative effect was to maximize the disorder on his flight decks at the moment the American attack arrived. The initial Midway strike had been insufficient to neutralize the island's defenses. The returning strike leader's report required a second attack. Nagumo ordered his reserve aircraft, which were armed with torpedoes for the anticipated anti-ship mission, to be rearmed with bombs for a second land attack. The rearming began. Then his search planes reported American naval vessels to the northeast, initially unidentified, then confirmed to include at least one carrier. the torpedo armament was ordered restored. The bombs were removed, the torpedoes reinstalled, and the ordnance that had been removed from the aircraft was stacked on the hangar deck and the flight deck, because returning it to the magazines in the normal manner took time that the tactical situation was not providing. When the dive bombers arrived at 10:22, Nagumo's carriers had been switching armament configurations for approximately 2 hours, and the results of those switches, bombs, torpedoes, and fuel in positions that maximized their susceptibility to the kind of fire that a bomb hit would start, were distributed across the decks and hangars of 3 ships whose damage control teams were about to face a catastrophe that their ship's configuration had involuntarily optimized. The torpedo bombers that died in the hours before 10:22, all 41 of them, from 3 different squadrons, pressing attacks that the Japanese combat air patrol of Zeros was destroying one by one at low altitude, while no torpedo found its target, died performing a function that looked, at the tactical level of individual aircraft and crew, like complete failure. The tactical record was unambiguous. No torpedo hit, 41 aircraft lost, the majority of their crews killed. The operational record was different. The torpedo bombers had held the Japanese combat air patrol at low altitude for approximately an hour, through the period when the dive bombers were approaching at high altitude. The Zeros that should have been at 15,000 to 20,000 feet to intercept the incoming dive bombers were at sea level and at low altitude, engaged in the final destruction of the torpedo bomber force. When McCluskey arrived overhead, they were out of ammunition, they were climbing. They needed altitude and time to intercept dive bombers, and they had approximately 30 seconds of the altitude they needed, and approximately 5 minutes of the time, and the arithmetic of those 2 deficits was the tactical window that the torpedo bombers had purchased with their lives and their aircraft. The navigation decision that McCluskey made when his dive bombers found empty ocean where the Japanese fleet was supposed to be was the individual decision on which the entire ambush pivoted. He was low on fuel. His formation had been searching for approximately 30 minutes beyond the point where the Japanese fleet should have been and had found nothing. The textbook decision was to return to the carrier before fuel state made that impossible. McCluskey spotted the wake of the destroyer Arashi racing at full speed. It had been left behind to depth charge an American submarine and was now hurrying to rejoin the fleet. He followed it. The decision required committing his formation to an extended search that would leave some of his aircraft with critically low fuel on the return journey. Several of his pilots ditched in the ocean after the attack because they ran out of fuel before reaching the carrier. McCluskey followed the destroyer and found the Japanese carriers at 10:22, at the precise moment when the torpedo bombers' sacrifice had created the window that the dive bombers needed. The decision that produced the 5 minutes was made by a man following a destroyer wake on fuel that he did not have enough of, gambling that the destroyer was going somewhere that mattered. The 5 minutes themselves, the 60 seconds of each dive, the bombs hitting, the secondary explosions starting, the 3 carriers beginning the fires that would sink them, were the operational consequence of the intelligence that identified Midway as the target. The ambush position that Nimitz established based on that intelligence, the sacrifice of the torpedo bombers that cleared the air defense at the critical moment, and the navigation decision that found the target after the doctrine said to turn back. Remove any one of these elements, and the 5 minutes at 10:22 do not produce 3 burning carriers. Remove the intelligence and the American carriers are not positioned to intercept. Remove the ambush position, and the dive bombers do not find the carriers before fuel forces a return. Remove the torpedo bombers' sacrifice, and the Zeros are at altitude to intercept the dive approach. Remove McCluskey's decision to follow the destroyer, and the dive bombers search empty ocean until fuel forces them to turn back. The 60 seconds of each dive were a moment of extraordinary individual courage and skill, executed under fire, in conditions that made accuracy both essential and improbable. They were also the final 60 seconds of a chain of decisions and sacrifices, and intelligence achievements and navigation gambles that had been building since Rochefort's team sent a false message about a broken water distillation plant. The ambush that wiped Japan out of the Pacific was not constructed in 60 seconds. It was constructed in 6 months, and the 60 seconds were the moment when everything that had been constructed became visible in the specific and irreversible form of 3 fleet carriers burning in the Central Pacific, taking with them the irreplaceable pilots and the carrier capacity that Japan's Navy could not replace. and without which the expansion of the Pacific Empire that Yamamoto had planned could not continue. The 60-second dive was the end of the story. Rochefort's basement in Pearl Harbor was the beginning of it.